Benito Mussolini's lifeless body hung upside down in a public square, a brutal spectacle of vengeance that marked the dictator's ultimate downfall. His final 24 hours were filled with fear, desperation, and betrayal, leading to this gruesome and humiliating end in April 1945. By late April 1945, Benito Mussolini's fate was sealed. The man who once ruled Italy with absolute power was now a fugitive, desperately trying to escape death. World War II in Europe was coming to an end. Germany was collapsing, and Hitler was trapped in his Berlin bunker, just days away from taking his own life. The Italian Social Republic, the puppet fascist state Mussolini had been leading in northern Italy, was also falling apart. Most of his government officials had either abandoned him or been captured. The people of Italy, who once cheered his name, now saw him as a traitor and a failure. For Mussolini, there were only two options left: escape or die. Mussolini had spent the previous weeks moving from one hiding place to another. He was exhausted, sick, and mentally broken. His once powerful speeches were now replaced with quiet mumbling. His health had been deteriorating for years. He suffered from stomach ulcers and severe depression. He barely ate, and his eyes were sunken. On April 25th, he was in Milan, his former stronghold, when he realized there was no hope left. The Allies were closing in from the south, and partisan fighters controlled most of northern Italy. That evening, he held his final government meeting. His ministers begged him to negotiate a surrender, but Mussolini refused. He still believed he could escape. Late that night, Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, left Milan. They joined a column of retreating German soldiers, hoping to cross into Switzerland. If he could reach Swiss territory, he planned to continue to Spain, where the fascist dictator Francisco Franco was still in power. He believed Franco might offer him refuge. Mussolini was not alone. He was traveling with about 15 high-ranking fascists, including some of his closest aides. They had joined a German anti-aircraft unit, commanded by Lieutenant Friedrich Pfeffer von Solomon, hoping to use the German troops as cover. Mussolini, once proud and defiant, had shaved his head and wore a German army coat and helmet to disguise himself. He carried a fake ID, but it was clear he was no ordinary soldier. His expression was blank. He had lost all the confidence that had once defined him. Petacci, however, refused to disguise herself. She dressed in fine clothes, wearing fur and jewelry. She was still fiercely loyal to Mussolini and refused to abandon him. She could have left, but she chose to stay by his side, even though it meant certain death. The convoy moved slowly toward the Swiss border, but they were being watched. Italian partisans and checkpoints were everywhere, and they knew important fascists were trying to escape. The partisans were hunting for Mussolini, and they wouldn't let him slip away. By the morning of April 27th, Mussolini and his group were near Lake Como, close to the town of Dongo. They thought they were safe. They were only a few miles from the Swiss border. But then, disaster struck. At about 2 p.m., a group of Italian partisans from the Garibaldi Brigade, led by Pierluigi Bellini della Stelle, stopped the convoy. The partisans had been blocking the roads, checking every vehicle for escaping fascists. At first, the Germans in the convoy tried to bluff their way through, claiming they were on an official mission. Partisans were suspicious. They demanded to search the trucks. One of the partisans, Urbano Lazzaro, stepped forward. As he checked one of the vehicles, he noticed a strange-looking German soldier sitting quietly inside. Something was off. The man's face looked familiar. Then it hit him. This was Mussolini. Lazzaro ordered him to step out of the truck. At first, Mussolini said nothing. He just sat there. His face was pale, and he knew it was over. He then slowly climbed out of the truck. His disguise had failed. The partisans cheered and shouted insults. They had captured the man who was responsible for years of war and suffering. But Mussolini didn't fight. He didn't beg. It was the final moment of his fall from power. After arresting Mussolini, the partisans searched the rest of the convoy. They quickly discovered that several high-ranking fascist officials were hiding among the Germans. One by one, the fascists were dragged out and arrested. Some tried to bribe the partisans, offering gold and jewels in exchange for freedom. But the partisans weren't interested in money. They wanted justice. Clara Petacci refused to leave Mussolini's side. She pleaded with the partisans to let him go, crying and screaming. But it was useless. The convoy had been caught, and there was no escape. Mussolini and Petacci were loaded into a small car and driven away. The roads were lined with people shouting and cursing. Some threw rocks at the car. As dawn broke on April 28th, Benito Mussolini sat in a small farmhouse near the village of Bonzanico, surrounded by armed partisans. He had spent the night in captivity, locked in a dark, cold room with Clara Petacci. His army was defeated, his government had collapsed, and his people had turned against him. The partisans guarding him were unsure of what to do. Some believed he should face a trial, a formal judgment for all his crimes. But others had no patience. Mussolini's rule had led to years of war, suffering, and executions. Thousands of Italians had died under his fascist regime, and entire families had been destroyed. For many partisans, there was no question. He had to die, and he had to die now. But time was running out. German forces were still present in northern Italy, and some Nazi divisions were only a short distance away. The partisans feared that if they waited too long, Hitler's troops might attempt a rescue, just as they had in 1943 when German commandos had freed Mussolini from captivity. Another escape could not be allowed. Early that morning, the decision was made. The National Liberation Committee, the leading resistance group in Italy, sent out the final order. Mussolini was to be executed immediately. There would be no trial, no formal charges, no final appeal. The men who made the decision included Luigi Longo, Sandro Pertini, and Leo Valiani, leaders of the anti-fascist movement who had spent years fighting against Mussolini's rule. Their decision was swift and final. They could not risk him being alive another day. Walter Ardisio, a senior partisan commander known as Colonel Valerio, was chosen to carry out the execution. He was a loyal communist who had fought in countless battles against the fascists. He was known for his cold determination and was trusted to get the job done. Without hesitation, he and a small group of armed partisans set off for the farmhouse where Mussolini and Petacci were being held. At exactly 4 p.m, Ardisio and his men arrived. There was no emotion in their voices as they entered the small room where Mussolini was sitting in a chair. His head was bowed and he looked exhausted, as if the life had already drained out of him. Petacci, on the other hand, was restless. As soon as Ardisio stepped forward, she threw herself at Mussolini, clutching his arm, begging the partisans for mercy. She sobbed uncontrollably, swearing her love for him, pleading for them to spare his life. Partisans ignored her. There was no discussion, no explanation. The decision had already been made. Ardisio ordered Mussolini and Petacci to stand up. Mussolini did not resist. Without a word, he pushed himself up from the chair. He knew there was no use in fighting. Petacci, however, would not stop crying. She held on to Mussolini's hand as they were led out of the farmhouse, refusing to let go. A truck was waiting outside. The two of them were placed in the back of the truck, surrounded by armed guards. Mussolini sat, but Petacci continued to weep. She whispered to Mussolini, trying to comfort him, trying to make sense of what was happening. But Mussolini gave no response. He simply sat there, waiting for the inevitable. The destination was a quiet place, near the village of Giulino di Mazzegra. It was a simple, unremarkable spot. There were no crowds, no soldiers, no signs of the war that had torn Italy apart. This place was chosen for one reason. It was remote, and there would be no interruptions. As the truck slowed to a stop, the guards climbed down and pulled the prisoners out. Mussolini and Petacci were led a few steps away, towards a stone wall near the entrance of an old villa. This is where their lives would end. At exactly 4:10 p.m. on April 28th, Ardisio raised his submachine gun, pointed it at Mussolini's chest, and pulled the trigger. But the gun jammed. For a moment, there was silence. Mussolini didn't react. He simply stood there. Petacci gasped, as if the failed shot had given her hope. But there would be no miracle. Audizio tossed the faulty gun aside and grabbed another weapon from one of his men. This time the gun fired. The bullets tore into Mussolini's chest. His body jerked from the impact. He collapsed to the ground, but he didn't die immediately. He twitched, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Blood seeped into the dirt beneath him. Petacci screamed in horror. In a desperate, futile act of love, she threw herself over Mussolini's body, trying to shield him. She spread her arms wide, sobbing uncontrollably. Audizio had no patience for this. He raised his gun once more and fired straight at Petacci. The bullets ripped through her chest, and her body slumped lifelessly over Mussolini. For the first time in years, Mussolini was truly powerless. The man who had ordered the executions of so many now lay dead, his body riddled with bullets. The woman who had loved him to the very end had shared the same fate. The silence that followed was heavy. The partisans stood for a moment staring at the bodies. There was no ceremony, and there were no prayers. The execution was quick, but what followed was more disturbing. After the execution, the partisans did not bury Mussolini and Clara Petacci. Their deaths were not the end of their humiliation. Instead, their bodies, along with those of the other high-ranking fascists who had been executed that day, were loaded onto a truck and driven towards Milan. The journey was grim. The truck rumbled over rough roads, the corpses piled on top of each other like discarded trash. Mussolini's body was barely recognizable, his uniform stained red, his face swollen, his chest riddled with bullet holes. Petacci's dress was soaked in blood. The truck drove to Piazzale Loreto, a public square in Milan. This location was also chosen for a reason. It had deep symbolic meaning. Just 8 months earlier, on August 10, 1944, German forces and Mussolini's fascist loyalists had executed 15 Italian partisans in this very square. Their bodies had been dumped in the street, left to rot under the sun as a warning to anyone who dared resist fascism. Now, the partisans wanted revenge. The truck entered Milan in the early morning hours of April 29th. Word had already spread. Mussolini's body was coming. Crowds began to form, people pouring into the streets. By the time the vehicle arrived at Piazzale Loreto, thousands had gathered. The partisans tossed the bodies off the truck without ceremony, dumping them onto the pavement like garbage. Men and women, young and old, rushed forward, screaming, cursing, and spitting on the corpses. Some people kicked and stomped Mussolini's lifeless body, crushing his face beneath their boots. Others fired their guns into his corpse, filling it with even more holes. A woman pulled out a knife and began stabbing his body. Another man grabbed a club and smashed his skull. The violence was uncontrollable. Years of anger, suffering, and humiliation had built up to this very moment, and now the people of Italy were taking out their revenge on the dictator who had ruined their country. His body was dragged across the ground, stripped of dignity, spat on, beaten, and humiliated. But the final act of humiliation had yet to come. As dawn broke, the partisans decided to hang the bodies upside down from a metal beam in front of a gas station at Piazzale Loreto. This was not just for display, it was symbolic. This was exactly how the fascists had treated the bodies of partisans they had executed the year before. Ropes were tied around Mussolini's ankles, and his body was hoisted into the air. Clara Petacci's body was strung up beside him, along with the corpses of other fascists. Photographers captured the scene. The image of Mussolini became one of the most famous photographs of the war's end. It was a clear message that fascism had been destroyed, and there was no coming back. The crowd below continued to curse and throw objects at the bodies. Some cheered. Some wept. For many Italians, this was the true end of Mussolini's rule. Not when he was captured, not when he was shot, but when his lifeless body was displayed like a trophy in the streets of Milan. For over a decade, Mussolini had ruled Italy with absolute power. He had been hailed as a savior, a leader, a man who would make Italy great. Now he was nothing more than a corpse, swinging in the wind, displaying what happens to those who betray their people. The corpses were eventually taken down by the authorities. The bodies of Mussolini, Patacci, and the other executed fascists were placed in simple wooden coffins and transported to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Milan, where they were scheduled for autopsies. Doctors examined Mussolini's body in detail. They found 9 bullet wounds scattered across his chest, arms, and abdomen. The fatal shot had pierced his chest, shattering his ribs and puncturing his lungs. His face, swollen and deformed from the beatings he received after death, barely recognizable. The body of Clara Petacci was also examined, confirming that she had been shot multiple times as well. Once the autopsies were complete, the bodies were placed in the morgue, locked away from public view. But Mussolini's corpse would not be left in peace. The question of what to do with his remains became a serious problem for the new Italian government. Many feared that if he were buried in a known location, fascist supporters might turn his grave into a shrine. Others wanted the body completely destroyed, ensuring that no trace of him remained. In the end, the authorities decided to bury Mussolini in an unmarked grave, hoping to prevent any future controversy. That, however, did not stop his most loyal followers. On April 23, 1946, almost exactly a year after Mussolini's execution, his body vanished. A group of fascist supporters had broken into the cemetery, stolen his remains, and disappeared into the night. The Italian government was thrown into chaos. For 4 months, the dictator's body remained missing. Rumors spread. Some said his followers had taken him to Rome. Others claimed his body was hidden in the mountains. The authorities launched a massive investigation, searching everywhere for the stolen body. It wasn't until August 1946 that Mussolini's remains were finally discovered, hidden inside a small monastery near Milan. The thieves, members of a radical fascist underground movement, had planned to give Mussolini a grand heroic burial to restore his image, but they had failed. The government, desperate to avoid further chaos, quietly took the body back. This time, they locked it away in a secret location far from the public eye. For over a decade, Mussolini's remains were kept under tight security, hidden from both fascist supporters and his enemies. Finally, in 1957, the Italian government made a controversial decision. They returned Mussolini's body to his family. His remains were taken to his birthplace, Predappio, a small town in northern Italy. There, he was given a private burial in the Mussolini family crypt. His tomb was placed inside a modest chapel, with a simple marble slab marking his final resting place. Even today, Mussolini's grave remains a source of division in Italy. While the majority of the country has rejected fascism, his tomb still attracts thousands of supporters each year. Some come to mourn him, leaving flowers and salutes, while others simply to see the resting place of one of history's most infamous dictators. Mussolini's execution was a warning to other fascist leaders, including Adolf Hitler, who just 2 days later committed suicide in his Berlin bunker rather than face the same fate. Even today, Mussolini remains a controversial figure. His end was violent, shocking, and unforgettable.